Buonasera a tutti. My name is Andrea Bartlett, and I am the Director of Events at the National Italian-American Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am honored to present to you the evolution of Italian food in America, a virtual event brought to you by the National Italian-American Foundation. We will be featuring a PowerPoint presentation and recommend that you use the full screen option on Zoom. At the end of the program, we'll be taking questions from the audience, so please send in your question using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, we are recording this webinar, and the recording will be sent to you in just a few days. And now I'd like to introduce you to Amy Riolo. Amy is an award-winning, best-selling author, chef, television personality, and Mediterranean diet advocate. She is known for sharing history, culture, and nutrition through global cuisine. A graduate of Cornell University, Amy is considered one of the world's foremost authorities on culinary culture. She is a culinary thought leader who enjoys changing the way we think about food and the people who create it. Amy is a food historian, culinary anthropologist, and Mediterranean diet advocate who makes frequent appearances on numerous television and radio programs, both in the United States and abroad. So Amy, that was a lot. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce you so you can kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you so much, Gabriella. Good evening, everybody. Buonasera. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight and have the opportunity to talk about this great topic. Andrea, you can go ahead and show the first slide if you like. If anyone is on social media or likes to follow along, learn more, I'm very active on social media and I give a lot of free tips and recipes, resources, things like that. So you have my website here. You have the website of the company that I do tours to Italy with, my YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook. I also have a page on Facebook called Calabria, Cuisine and Culture, if you're interested specifically in Calabria, and my Instagram page and my Pinterest page. Feel free to take a screenshot, and if God forbid I don't get to someone's question tonight, or you think about something later, you can always reach me at these handles. So I'm really excited to talk about Italian-American cuisine because as a fourth generation Italian-American, my family originally hails from Calabria, and I'm unique in that I have Calabrese on both sides. And also, I also have a very close relationship with my relatives in Italy. So it's a kind of a different type of perspective. I grew up in America, and I bring that sensibility to this discussion, but as well, I worked, lived, and continue to spend as much time in Italy as possible for business and for pleasure and for family. So I have a kind of a well-rounded knowledge of what's going on in both places. And to tackle this topic, I really wanted to bring both of those sensibilities to it. I didn't want to talk about Italian-American food from the lens of somebody who had never been to Italy. And I also didn't want to talk about it from the lens of an Italian who didn't understand what took place in America in the last century. So that's kind of what I did to create this. So tonight we're going to talk about Italian modern culinary history and its place in the world. We'll juxtapose Italian and Italian-American cuisine, and we'll talk about the undercurrents that influenced Italian cuisine in America. And then we'll identify and distinguish, this says 5, but it's actually 6 types of Italian-American cuisine. So that when you see them, you'll kind of know what they are. And if somebody, has a negative word to say about Italian cuisine, you can say, well, hey, that's not really Italian-American cuisine. That's this instead. And what real Italian-American cuisine is this. Because it's all about classification. When people get upset and when the red flags kind of start to go up is when we call something by the wrong name. But when we call it by the right name, if it's Italian, we call it Italian. If it's American, we call it American. And if it's Italian-American, we call it that. Within those genres, we have a lot of great foods to celebrate. So usually I think the bottom left will let you, there we go. If you all are interested, a really good precursor to tonight's presentation is something that I have on my YouTube channel from the Library of Congress. It was an event that we did for the World Week of Italian Cuisine with the Italian Embassy called Italian Cuisine in the World. And I did it in collaboration with Domenica Marchetti, who's another Italian-American cookbook author, friend of mine, and member of NIAF as well. And so you can check that out. That will give you a very brief but full history of the cuisine in Italy. And that's good to watch in conjunction with this, because then you can kind of see how Italian cuisine itself got to be the way it is. We can go to the next slide.
I'm sorry, Amy, I am pushing it, I promise, and it is just taking a minute.
Sometimes it does that.
Oh, did we get it?
Yep, there you go.
Okay.
And so I like to use this slide because, it says, quote unquote, Italian food in the world. And of course, this could also be Italian-American food. But what's unique about this is because Italian food is now the world's most popular cuisine, and because it's the most popular cuisine in America, what gets passed off as Italian food or Italian-American food often is not. And so that is a detriment to our culture and also to our health, because, for example, spaghetti al pomodoro, if you do it right with a good quality pasta, maybe one that's trafilato in bronzo, like extruded with a bronze dye or a gold dye, or just a general good quality, with homemade tomato sauce or made from tomatoes that are good quality, jarred, boxed, but not a jarred sauce that has a lot of preservatives and palm or corn oil and corn syrup and all of these other ingredients, it can be a healthful dish for you. But when you start using it, eating it out of a can, eating all those other additives, that's what makes spaghetti so not good, quote unquote, not good for you. Same thing with pizza. If you make it the authentic way, 3 ingredients in the crust, tomatoes, fresh mozzarella, basil, it's good for you. It's actually, nutritionists have proven that an authentic pizza napolitana is actually a complete meal in itself, because it has the 3 macronutrients, right, of protein, fat, and carbohydrate. But when it's done in a way where you're using a sauce with all of these other ingredients, and the dough has sugar and 50 million other fake things in it, and the cheese isn't real, then it's a different product. So we call them the same thing, but they're definitely distinct products. So it's important that we categorize what is Italian and also what is Italian American for our health and for our culture. Here's some fun facts. So Italian food is the #1 cuisine in Italy, in the US and in the world, as I mentioned before. There's more pizza eaten per capita in the United States nowadays than there is in Italy. Pizza is served to the GIs overseas on the 4th of July. As I mentioned before, because it's so popular, it's often misrepresented and misunderstood. And only about 1/3 of Italian foods eaten in the US are imported from Italy. We can go to the next slide. So some of the other foods are made right here in the United States in the true Italian tradition, which is great. That's what we call glocalization, right? When you take something global, you use local ingredients, and you come up with something new that's still a good quality product. And then there are other things, of course, which are fake and counterfeit that are not good. When we speak of Italian food, of course, we always have to speak about regional Italian food. And those of you who are Italian American and Italian know that even within each of Italy's 20 regions, there are often variations between different places. For example, my family's from Crotone in Calabria. So if you look at the map and you see Calabria and you see kind of where the sea is, that's pretty much near where Crotone is. Within that one town, my relatives living literally in the same town will call the same dish 3 different names. And that's within the same town, like not even the region. So we really need, if we want to understand Italian food, we need to understand the food of the different regions. And that can keep us learning for the rest of our lives, because there's so much biodiversity in Italy with the crops and with the products, and so many different local traditions, patron saints in different towns, that they all led way to unique food. And then if you think about America and we go forward, one of my friends in Italy, a blogger named Luca Marcori, he has a blog called Luca's Italy. He often jokes with me that America is the 21st region of Italy. And so that's the food that we're going to talk a little bit more about tonight. This map shows some indigenous and early settlements in Italy. And I like to see the one on the left and the one on the right, because the one on the left is an ancient map, BCE. The one on the right is from 1000 of the Common Era. But still, if you look at both of those compared to the one that I just showed you with the 20 regions, it's still much different, because the one on the left, which was ancient, this one had the indigenous tribes as well as the new colonizers in Italy. So you see the Celts up at the north, right? We don't really think about Italy and Celts, but that people who are from northern Italy have that in their lineage. and you go down to the Etruscans and the Umbrians, the Samnites. You know, when I lead tours in Molise and Abruzzo, we often talk about the Saniti, who were the people that were there before the Romans and who gave way to their culture. Also the Apulians, the Messapians from Puglia, the Italoites and the Greeks in Calabria, the Romans, obviously, in Rome, and then we have the Sicani, who were the indigenous people in Sicily, and the Carthaginians. And so this was ancient times. So if you are from one of those regions, those different groups are within your DNA. And then if you come to the right in the year 1000, 1,000 years later, but 1,000 years before now, we have, look at Sicily. It was an emirate, so like the United Arab Emirates, right? In 1000 of the Common Era, Sicily was under the control of the Fatimids, which was a North African Shiite emirate, now based in what is now Tunisia. They claimed power in Sicily 50 years before they claimed it in Cairo. So that just shows you how deep those roots are in Sicily and how important Sicily was in the entire Mediterranean, because if any group claimed power in Sicily, they had access to the whole Mediterranean because it was the most powerful island. So it's very important to understand that. Whereas you have Calabria and Puglia were part of the Byzantine Empire, and still very much of our, the way we approach things, the way people think from that part of Italy has a lot to do with their Byzantine roots. You have the principalities, you have Corsica, which was disputed between France and Italy and still is today, the Kingdom of Lombardy up in the north, and it just goes on and on. So that's how things were divided up. And to understand Italian food, we need to understand those influences as well as what's going on nowadays. Then, of course, we have Columbus. We know that when Columbus, came to the United States and, well, we should say the New World, not the United States. When Columbus came to the New World, they brought back with them to Europe corn, tomatoes, potatoes, vanilla, a lot of plants and peppers, things that weren't growing yet in Europe. So it's hard for us to imagine Italy without tomatoes, right? Or peppers, but it's true. They got them from the New World. So then they became part of the cuisine as well. And I like to use this slide because it shows New World ingredients in Italian food. So you say, like in Calabria, they have a saying that if it has tomatoes and peppers, and it's Calabrese, but of course, those were New World foods. So before the 17th century, those ingredients were not Calabrese. Now we can't live without them, and the whole region is known from them. And the same thing by the dish on the right with the tomatoes and peppers. There are a lot of Roman and Italian influences in America in architecture. And if you study history here in Washington, D.C., you can look up some things that Thomas Jefferson did, some things that George Washington did, and you will find a lot of Italian roots in them. The entire way that DC is, set up, and the design, and many different influences from the Capitol building on down have Italian roots. And I like to talk about that because these things were taking place before the immigrants came to the United States. So it wasn't like, there were very Anglo-Saxon, everything was Anglo-Saxon here in the United States, and then the Italians came and brought that with them. There was already appreciation on the behalf of our founding fathers for Italian culture and Italian traditions, and that continued to grow. If you're interested, I wrote a column for a magazine called iItaly, called The Capital Italian, and it outlines all of the Italian influences here in Washington, D.C. It's a really good read if you're interested in that kind of thing. This article shows Jefferson and how he was influenced by the Italians for Monticello. He says, America offers a wonderful opportunity for the world and an inspiration as well, since our civilization is taken from the best that others have to offer, from the very jewels of the old world. And then we have also here the gardens at Monticello. And of course, George Washington had a relationship with Filippo Mazzei, who was responsible for bringing the viticulture and the wine here into the United States. So our American wine industry was built, was created by Italians. And also this was under the influence of George Washington, and it was publicly acknowledged. So he said, I thank you for your obliging act of the culture of wine, and I'm happy to hear that your plantation of them is in so prosperous a way. Other artwork, Jefferson visited Italy as often as possible and brought back so many of the different traditions to Monticello. He also, had cardinals and counts and people like that among his colleagues and the dignitaries that he used to entertain. So he was constantly, interested in different aspects of Italian work. And this bust here was commissioned in an architectural contest from two Italians who were very poor, named Franconi and Andrei. Our first rice that came into the United States was brought back by Jefferson. He had a friend in Pavia, who gave him some rice, and he brought that back, kind of smuggled it into the United States because it wasn't allowed at that time. And that was how we got the first rice crop in the United States. Of course, from there, the rice, took over and it became its own thing, and it became something that the African-American community and people that were brought to this country really had a hand in growing and expanding and bringing forward. So it wasn't, Italians didn't remain in control of the rice industry or anything like that. It's just that this first type of rice that came into the United States was actually from Italy. And then this is an example of Palladio. So if you go down and you see other different works and the University of Virginia and different things that were commissioned during Jefferson's time, a lot of their works were borrowed from the Italian style, and specifically from Palladio's style, including the Capitol building and the Library of Congress. And then in 1892, we have the mass immigration of Italians starts into the United States. So this is the first time when this large number of Italian immigrants really comes and arrives here in the United States and starts to make their own impact in their own way. Nowadays, we have 17.8 million Americans of Italian descent. And I highly recommend this PBS series for anybody who hasn't seen it or just interested. I like it because it shows such a wide range of industry that Italians are involved in, and people who we definitely associate with their Italianness, but have also become very successful in the US as well. The main regions that Italians came from, not to say that they didn't come from everywhere, but these were kind of the main regions nowadays: Campania, Calabria, Abruzzo, Sicily, Basilicata, and Puglia. By 1980, there were about 25 million Italians that were living outside of Italy. And of course, some were here and some were in Latin America as well. And it's important at this time to talk about American food standards, because when people start to degrade, talk bad about Italian-American cuisine and not really know it or wonder why they deviated from things that were going on in Italy, this is the image that I want them to see. Because Italy did not look like this when the Italian Americans came and arrived in New York and other cities where they had to live in very crowded, cramped conditions. It was before industrialization. It was before a lot of our health and hygiene standards that we have nowadays in this country. And so it was dirty, it was not safe, and there really were no standards. And this is what Italians found themselves in. It's important to remember that a lot of these people were coming from rural communities. So even though they were poor, they had access to a lot of great food and a lot of different things, very different from what you would have in an urban center if you were poor. And this slide actually shows that. So you see on the right-hand side what someone's area, neighborhood, backyard would have looked like if they were, maybe leaving for the United States. They might not have any money or an education or know how to read and write, but that was the setting that they may have lived in. And then you look at the left, and this is what they were coming to when they were coming in the cities, the type of conditions that they would have to live in. So it's a very big mindset shift to get taken from that one place and put into the other one. And that's what really starts setting up the difference between Italian cuisine and Italian-American cuisine. There was also this idea by the American government that social workers would go into the tenement buildings and give advice to the poor mothers who were, coming in as immigrants and their children. And the number one advice that they gave them was to stop giving them the food that they were eating in Italy, that what we now call the Mediterranean diet was not healthy, and that it was not good for the kids to eat too many vegetables that this diet was lacking in protein, and that they needed to eat meat and potatoes if they wanted their kids to grow up big and strong. So this is the number 2 reason why Italian cuisine is different than Italian-American cuisine is different from Italian, because this notion of getting enough protein, this notion of what you had before was not good, and you'd have to eat the American way so that your children will grow up, big and strong. There is also the 3rd reason why the cuisine is different is because of racism and prejudice. And unfortunately, there were so many images back then. If you've studied, dehumanization, whether it's in any group, whether it's in the African-American community and an Asian community and with indigenous peoples, that same technique, that same mindset was applied to Italian immigrants when they came. And so people were, shut out of movie theaters, labor unions, churches, things like that. And there was a lot of images in the media that were negative against Italians. They were described by the press as being, especially Sicilians, a criminal race. They were, used racial slurs like Dago and Guinea. So both of these, very derogatory and not good at all to be associated with, but that was allowed back then. And that's what a lot of Italians had to endure when they came to this country. So this picture on the left is from New Orleans, and it shows Italians working on a ship dock. And you can see the guy up on the top in the middle there with the hat on. That kind of hat was like an overseer. And then the Italian laborers, would have like the little caps on and things like that. And they were doing the menial labor. But there was nothing wrong with calling someone a term like that in those days. They could legally do it. And they were often commended for doing it. And people would get fired by their last name. So if someone, had an Italian sounding last name, and the owner had, heard all of these things in the media and really believed that they were a subcategory, they would not give them work. And that's why also a lot of Italian Americans lost their names. And it's why we lost, for many generations, the language, because it was not even safe for people to be who they were in this country at that time. And I like to highlight that, even though it's a negative thing, because it's very important to wrap our ideas around this head. It's easy to come nowadays from an industrialized nation with money in your bank account, with nice clothes, and with not having to work this way in a country that has already, has labor laws and equality and things like that, and say, how could you lose your language? How could you do this? How could you do that? But to be in those settings, safety was a concern before anything about cultural identity. And so that's why things were the way they were. This picture on the left shows the labor wages that were given to people in the 1895. Common labor Italian was $1.15 to $1.25. These were daily wages. Common labor for African Americans, which were then called colored, was $1.25 to $1.40, and common labor for people who were considered white was supposed to be between $1.30 and $1.50. So again, no laws to protect anybody. The largest mass lynching in the United States was against Sicilian Americans. It was described as a good thing by President Roosevelt, and described in labors. It also talked about the people who conducted the lynching as being credible members of high society. So there wasn't even any repercussion for that taking place. It was like, it was a really good thing. This was what was supposed to happen, and everybody was happy about it. And again, that's important to know. So because of this, a lot of Italian Americans lost their language. And there was a time when, if people spoke another language, if they spoke with an accent, it made them not get work because their English wasn't good enough. It made them not get work because then people knew that they were Italian, foreign, whatever group people didn't like at those times, and then they wouldn't hire them. So that was the kind of prejudice that was being faced. Then also in the times of war, like in World War I, there were the enemy aliens. So for that reason, a lot of Italians couldn't get work. And there was just a post today about Trudeau from Canada making that public apology about, the detention of the Italians during the war. But this was a family here on the left, that their story was they actually fled Italy because they were not fascist. They did not want to have anything to do with fascism. And so they came to America for freedom, and then they were detained because of that. So For this reason, a lot of people didn't pass the Italian language down, and that's why a lot of people, Italians, Americans in America don't speak Italian today. And when we lose the language, we lost a lot with the food and a lot with the culture as well. So this picture I have of Italian American cuisine because I think these two dishes became the most iconic, cannoli and spaghetti, with meatballs, even though this is not a good picture and they've got the dried herbs back there, but they are those most iconic things that, Americans and Italian Americans associate, I think, with Italian American food. And of course, the cannoli, direct implant from Caltanissetta in Sicily, and sometimes made a little differently, but pretty much stayed true to how it was made in Sicily. Spaghetti with meatballs took a lot more liberties, especially because meatballs were traditionally something that in different Southern Italian regions, especially Calabria, where my family's from, were eaten on Sunday. Meatballs are like one of the epitomes of cuisine. They have little ones in the lasagna, they have little ones in the minestra maritata, or the soup, in English they call it the wedding soup, not really served at weddings, but because it has meat in with all of the other things. And in many different applications they have these, but not necessarily sitting on a plate of spaghetti. But if you're in America, and remember, you're finally able to afford meat, and you've been told, maybe even your mother was told by a social worker that you needed to have more protein and meat was the way to go, and you can afford it because in this country meat's really cheap, you're going to give your kids more meat. And that's how that misconception, but also like origin of our cuisine started. Also, Italians at this time were really craving a strong cultural identity. If you're living in a place where it's not safe to be who you are, you can't say your last name in public, you can't speak the language in public without fear of something happening to you or losing a job or something like that. If you've got all that going on one side, there's also internally a very deep desire to be able to be who you really are, to express yourself, to be able to, hang on to whatever areas of your identity you can. And so the pranzo domenicale, or the Sunday supper, became a way for Italians to do that, because usually they weren't working on Sunday. People could get together on Sundays, and this was a day with among closed doors or in your own community, you could be Italian. So food traditions were one of the things that got passed down. They might have been changed or manipulated or altered, but that idea of eating a certain pasta dish or making a certain dessert was passed on. What was available was, also added into those items. Things might have been given, and people might have been given Americanized names, so that made it a little bit different. And also the notion of restaurants. A lot of the immigrants, when they left Italy, they weren't used to going to restaurants. Restaurants weren't a thing. They weren't really even a thing yet in the United States. But by the time, the immigrants had been here for a few decades, restaurants were becoming a thing, and Italians were starting to work in restaurants and to own restaurants. So that helped to promote both Italian culture and Italian food at the same time. And I like this picture because it talks about women passing cooking down through their daughters. And this was something that always happened in Italy, and it also always happened with many of us in the Italian American community, is that our mothers pass us down for things. I remember my mom sitting up on a counter when I was 3 and rolling meatballs, and she used to cater. And that was like my first time. Today I'm a chef, but that was, in those days, that was my first technique, was rolling the meatballs and then rolling the cookies. And so that was the first thing that I learned. But it's so important because Gabriella and I were speaking a little bit before we started this, and to write down recipes for us can be very challenging because we didn't learn that way from cookbooks. We learned usually from our mothers or from another family member, and that's one of the strong links that still stayed and still carried through in our culture until today. The role of the church was also really important. Holidays, recipes, things like this, just as with other immigrant communities today. If I go in my neighborhood in suburban Washington, D.C., and I go around and I look at the churches, all different religions, but Christian churches, they will have Ethiopian writing on them, Korean writing on them, Arabic writing on them, different languages, because a lot of our churches are being kept alive now by the immigrant communities. And it was the same way when Italians came and when Irish people came, 100 years ago into this country. The church was really the center of the life. And in those times, because the work was so grueling and the days were so hard, that the church had even a deeper role than it did in Italy. You know, a lot of peasants in Italy couldn't go to church because on Sunday was just like every other day. People had to work the fields, they had to tend the herds, they had to do whatever they were doing every day. And so traditionally in Italy, farmers didn't go to Sunday mass. But in the United States, if you were now working as a laborer or construction or, you know, what other kind of work that you were doing, if you were off on a Sunday, then you were able to go to church. So there was, first of all, that idea that, number one, you could go to church, and then when you were there, you were going to meet other Italians, so you were going to be safe. One, because you were protected by the spirituality, but two, because you had your community with you. And so dishes could be passed down through that way. People would eat communal meals at the church. They would have festivals and different Sagre and Saints Days, San Gennaro, things like that. And so all of these traditions were able to live through the church. And the church took on a special meaning for us, even more so than in Italy. And then because of that, we have things like the Feast of the Seven Fishes. So in Italy, of course, everyone eats fish on Christmas Eve, pretty much. And usually, and that tradition starts back to not being able to have meat before communion. So if you went to midnight mass on Christmas, then before that midnight mass, you had to eat fish or, you know, something vegetarian. Same thing with the weekends. That's why, like on Friday in Italy, most trattorie serve fish, because you didn't eat meat until Sunday. Then that's why we have the ragu and the meat sauces and the meatballs on Sunday, because you had taken communion, so then you could eat meat as part of the meal after that. So there was always this idea of eating fish before you took communion. But in America, it took on a special meaning, again, because of these religious, you know, the importance of religion, the importance of the church, and the importance of needing to create new traditions that were meaningful, because Italians were losing, in America, were losing so much of the other rights that they had. So some people say that the seven fishes stands for the seven sacraments. Other people say seven stands for the number of days it took God to create the universe. Some people do it with 9 fishes, and they say that that's for the Trinity times 3. Some people do 13, and they say that's for the 12 apostles plus Jesus. So there's all different ways of the numbers, not just 7, but of course the 7 caught on, and now this is more important, more popular in the United States than it is in Italy nowadays. Then I like to talk a little bit about opera. So Puccini was, you know, alive from 1858 until 1927. So his life really kind of spanned when the majority of the Italian Americans were leaving Italy and coming here. And this was very important because to understand what Italians were going through in this country, how they were suffering, the amount of poverty, the amount of sacrifice, and those kind of things, and then to have the epitome of culture, class, luxury, wealth in Italy with the opera at the time. Remember, this was before a lot of our, you know, modern listening type things and radio and stuff like that. So people were listening on phonographs and with these big discs, or they had to see someone live. And there were different ways that musicians, you know, performed. But to know that Puccini was in Italy doing opera at this level, and there were all of these people in America craving this link to their country, opera became one of the ways, one of the areas of pride for Italian Americans. And again, it kind of superseded what was going on in Italy, because the average Italian in Rome or in Bari or in Molise didn't really need opera on a daily basis to get them through. Of course, they loved it as for what it was, but not quite as important. Most Italian immigrants have a huge affinity for opera that has nothing to do with their way of life, just because it's beautiful, because it's Italian, because it's something that they could listen to and align with their roots and with their culture so well. And it was also wonderful for the world to see different examples of Italians, not only as poor immigrants, but also as trendsetters and as people, you know, creating things that are gifts to humanity. And Enrico Caruso falls right in that, because his lifetime also took place right within the mass immigrations. And he came and performed in 74 different roles, you know, in the opera and in different places. He had 247 different recordings that he made from 1902 to 1920. So it made him a very popular international and entertainment star, and definitely the #1 with Italians in America. His story in itself was inspiring to people. So this was something, he was someone that people could relate to, and he was someone that Italians were proud to associate themselves with. So much so that English language and the study of music everywhere in the world uses all of these Italian words. And this is important. I know we're talking about food and not music, but all of the daily living arts have a lot in common. And if you're living in a culture where it's not safe to be who you are, or you can't hold on a job because you're from a different country, and music holds these names that are in your language, that's a very big deal. It's something easy for Italians to align with. It's a source of pride, and it gives Americans a different outlook on what is Italian, not just negative of what they're hearing and seeing in the news, but also something positive. This beautiful type of music comes from the same culture. So in Italy, at that same time, we see pizzerias really start to be important in Naples. And in 1889, Raffaele Esposito made 3 pizzas in the honor of King Umberto di Savoia and his wife, Regina Margherita. He made the marinara and Masto Nicola, which was kind of one that had lard in it. And some of these are very traditional recipes. And the marinara, which is the tomato sauce and no cheese. It was his wife who decided to put the mozzarella and the basil to make the tricolore, or the color of the flag. And that's how we got the pizza margherita. So also during the time of the immigrants, this is when pizza was becoming more important in Italy. Because of that, it became the perfect ingredient for Italians to import into the United States, and the perfect way for Italians to have food businesses in the United States, because pizzeria were still a novelty item in Italy. So if they brought that to America, that would be something that, one, Italians could gravitate to and know that they were on trend with things that were happening in Italy, but also something for Americans that they never had here in the United States before. It's said that Benjamin Franklin actually tried obtaining a recipe for the Parmigiano Reggiano, which of course has an 8th century history, and very strict guidelines in terms of how it was made and things like that. So even in those days, these types of ingredients were coveted by Americans, despite their treatment of Italian Americans. And then we have General Garibaldi and spaghetti. So, you know, up until the 19th century, spaghetti was not widespread in Italy, especially tomato sauce wasn't. But he ate it at Melito di Porto Salvo in Calabria, and he told the soldiers to bring back the recipes with him to the north, because he said, I swear this will be the dish that unifies all of Italy. And of course, it's the one dish that no matter where we go in the world, we see it, we think of Italy, we think of home, and everyone loves it. By 1867, there started becoming, in Italy, mass-produced pasta. So the House of Buitoni opened there. And of course, that led way to many other types of mass-produced pasta, and then mass-produced pasta in the United States. Before that, pasta was always made by hand. And think about it, now you have all this huge foreign market, which is Italian Americans in America. Now these women are living in tenement buildings, cramped spaces, working in factories, things like that in the day. They can't be home rolling fresh pasta. Maybe they don't get the flour every day, but they can consume packaged pasta. Also, it's important to remember with immigrants, a lot of times people don't learn to cook before they leave their country. Maybe someone cooked for them. Maybe help at home was inexpensive, but then they arrive to the new country realizing they don't know how to cook. So packaged pasta filled that need in those times, and it started becoming popular in this country with Italians far before Italian Americans. And of course, it caught on eventually in Italy too, as women started working more outside of the home, but not as quick as in the United States. Then we have the early Italian American weddings. And this is all different trends that we have here in the United States that never really happened in Italy. One is the cookie table. Of course, in different cities, in especially like Pennsylvania and New Jersey, they're known for the cookie tables. I remember my mom and I and my grandmother would be rolling cookies like it was like for a week at night. We'd be up at like 3 o'clock in the morning rolling all these cookies for the weddings, and it was just a tradition that we always had. But not so much in Italy. They do make cookies, and they do have the tradition of the old tradition of the bride and the groom going around and presenting everyone with cookies, but not the cookie tables, not quite as much as we have in the United States. Also, the sandwich weddings. You know, there were times when people couldn't afford to have big banquets, or there were no places for them to have big banquets that could hold the entire community. So they had what they called sandwich weddings, and they would make sandwiches and hand them out to the guests, something that never happened in Italy. Wedding soup, Italian wedding soup. Again, this is derived from the term minestra maritata, or the married minestra soup, because this was a soup where the minestra by nature has to have a grain, a vegetable, a broth, and a legume component, at least one of each. But then when you add meat into it, in this case it was usually little meatballs, then they called it maritata, because you're marrying the meat with all those other ingredients. So Italian wedding soup became a thing, and then people actually started eating it at weddings, which had nothing to do with what was going on in Italy at weddings. Then we have the labor laws and the civil rights movement, and it was really Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and all of his work that helped Italian Americans, sometimes on purpose. Sometimes it was directed to do that specifically, and other times it was just a byproduct of, because African Americans were getting rights, then everybody else got rights too. But we really owe a lot in terms of status in this country to the likes of Dr. Martin Luther King. And then the next thing that happened was American movies started to be made in Italy. And this idea of, romance, especially after the war, GIs had come back from Italy, even though it was war torn, but they had seen how beautiful it was and how nice the way of life was. And so it became very glamorized in Hollywood, things like A Roman Holiday and Three Coins in the Fountain and An Affair to Remember. All of those movies were all shot in, Venice and Rome. So it gave Americans a good image of Italy, and also this idea that it would be a desirable place to go. And that helped Italian Americans to be able to really show a little bit more of their culture and to take pride in their culture publicly. Also 1950s fashion. So Jackie O was really big into the Italian designers, Gucci, Pucci. A lot of them, if she wore it, it made the headlines. And this was another way to see Italian names in the media in a good sense, and also made more Americans want to go to Italy to buy the clothes and to do the things that Jackie O was doing. We also, of course, have Italian films. So Sophia Loren, Gina Lollobrigida, Dino De Laurentiis, all of these people who we see on the big screen, Sophia Loren winning an Oscar, that was a really, really big deal in those days, and helped to bring Italian faces in American homes and good examples of Italians in American homes. Also music, we have Dean Martin, El Martino, Mario Lanza, Frank Sinatra, all of these people singing maybe some Italian words in their songs, but with Italian last names, people knowing that they're Italian, and helped really to influence the culture as well. And then I love this quote by Diego Delle Valle. He says, Italian style is a natural attitude. It's about a life of good taste. It doesn't have to be expensive, simple, but with good taste. Luxury is possible to buy, good taste is not. And this kind of set up this trend, in the United States and around the world, of what Italian fashion was and what Italian things are. And so this is, again, gave Italian Americans more permission to be who they really are. I see some comments, but I can't read them, but we will get to them at the end. And then the food. So just like in the music, Italian words started coming into place for food. Pizza, right? What else are you going to call it? Ravioli, pasta, bologna, even though that's a different thing from what we know as bologna. Coffee, pepperoni. Of course, pepperoni with one P in Italian means pepper. Spelled this way in America means a pork product. So a little different there, but still Italian sounding name. Salami, broccoli, arugula from rucola, branzino. You don't see the word sea bass ever on menus anymore. You just see branzino. Even if it comes from a different country, it can be Greek, they'll call it branzino, or Chilean, they call it branzino. Calamari, we don't see the word squid anymore on menus anywhere. It could be an American restaurant, it could be a Michelin star French restaurant, but a lot of times they're using the word calamari, because that's what everybody associates with squid nowadays. And all of these other words. So this is also a great thing, because now Italians can take back these words and start using their own words to describe their own food. One of the things that happened that wasn't so great was that then other marketers started using those foods and those names, even though then they weren't in the hands of the Italians anymore. But we'll get to that a little bit later. These are the cities in the United States with the major with the major Italian American population. So New York, Philly, Chicago, Boston, Pittsburgh, LA, Detroit, Cleveland, Rochester, Washington, Tampa. in New Orleans. Americans now, they're excited because they've got the GIs coming back talking about Italy. They've got these wonderful movies. They're hearing Jackie O, talk about her fashions from Italy, and they're hearing the music, and people start to want to go to Italy. Right now, Italy is the #1 place that Americans go to. Of course, it wasn't always that way, but prior to World War II, but afterwards it was. So I love this Giuseppe Verdi quote that says, "You may have the universe if I may have Italy." And just kind of sums up, then Americans started to fall in love with Italy. And in the 1970s and 1980s, we start seeing much more influx of Italian food in America, both in Italian restaurants and in American restaurants, in American supermarkets, and American homes. So unfortunately, there's that, stereotype of Northern versus Southern Italian food, which we'll get into a little bit later. But you start to see things like minestrone, parmigiana, fettuccine alfredo, which I'll talk about, shrimp scampi, risotto, radicchio, pesto, olive oil, and cheeses that before weren't a big part on the American culinary scene. Sirio Maccioni from Le Cirque in 1975, he really helped to put a lot of Italian recipes, Italian dishes in fine dining settings. The fettuccine alfredo, even though there's a big controversy about that, if you look on my Instagram feed from, I think a couple months ago, there's National Fettuccine Alfredo Day, I tell the history of it. Where basically the silent movie star Mary Pickford in 1917 went to Rome with Douglas Fairbanks, and they were on their honeymoon, and they actually tasted the fettuccine alfredo, and it was at a restaurant in Rome where they still make it today. And my friend Marco Maglioni is the chef there. If you go, you can get it. But the owner made it because his wife had just given birth. And so to kind of restore her spirits, he made her a pasta with butter and parmigiano and things like heavy ingredients. And he happened to serve it to them. They loved it. They came back to the United States. They said, "We ate this delicious dish." Of course, nobody in Italy had ever heard of it outside of that restaurant and outside of Rome. But in America, it caught on because now here's a dish that American movie stars are talking about from Italy. Every Italian restaurateur, chef in the United States started putting it on their menu. And that's why we have fettuccine alfredo here, and we don't have it in Italy. But you still can get it at that one restaurant in Rome. It's a Alfredo alla Scofera. It's a wonderful restaurant, and you can eat it with gold forks there. And then politics. So Italians started becoming much more heavily involved in politics. We have, ambassador and our former Congresswoman Connie Morella. We have Mario Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, Geraldine Ferraro, Samuel Alito, and many, many more Italian Americans. Once we started getting into politics, then things really started to change because there was a total different face put on government in the United States. There are still a lot of stereotypes in food and in the Italian-American world, and I just put this here because I would love to kind of remind people to not use these, because given the brief examples of history that I talked about, which really are very brief, it's not sensitive at all, and it's not culturally aware, and it's not proactive to continue using those things. I know some people like to joke and kind of use them between Italians as a term of endearment, but it's not a term of endearment. Like, you pick another term, like choose any Italian word you want. Just make sure that it's something that honors our culture, because whenever I see something talking about the communal meal, as a Mediterranean lifestyle ambassador, my main goal is to get people to eat together. That's the base of the Mediterranean diet. And it's one that Italians do really well, especially the Sunday supper. Even modern day Italy, 70% of Italians still enjoy the Sunday supper together. So that's a lot of people. I know a lot of you watching do it, and a lot of Italian Americans do it. But when you see the pictures of the Sunday suppers, it's usually like the one on the left with people from Goodfellas sitting around a table, or some other mafia figures, characters from movies, The Godfather, around the table. I know there are other images of Italians eating lunch or dinner together that we do not need to keep using those images over and over. It does nothing for us. Same thing on the right. There was a debate recently online of whether Tony Gimignani, who's a pizza superstar, very famous, very accomplished, amazing pizza maker, award-winning here in the United States, should have called his new bagel concept the Dago Bagel. And so people were going back and forth, is it a joke? Is it funny or whatever? going back to what I said earlier about the word dago, to me, it will never be funny. It will never be a joke. And Tony Gimignani, thank God, people like him have built their names up to the point that they can just use their own name. It's Italian. It's a success story. And you don't need to use a racial slur to do it. That slur, by the way, was used not only for Italians, but also Spanish and Portuguese. It was from the name Diego that then they started calling Diego. So it's like, it's not even accurate of a slur. It's just like a horrible thing. And I like to be vigilant of those, but more than that, just put good things out there. Just make sure, you know, you're using the freedom that we have to put good things forward. So now we get into the good stuff. This is really the meat of tonight's topic. And this is something that I've recently copyrighted because it's taken me a long time to come up with this little formula. And I'm going to continue my research, but I like to quantify and qualify Italian-American cuisine this way. Number one, authentic Italian food in the United States. Number two, Italian, in quotes, meaning fake Italian food in the United States. Number three, actual Italian-American food. Number four, foods that Italians have invented in the United States. Number five, culinary time capsules. And number six, American foods made with Italian ingredients. So this is an example of number one, authentic Italian food in the United States. So this is food created by Italians from Italy using traditional means with ingredients they have here in the United States. On the left, we have a picture of lagane with a hand-cut lamb ragu from El Tiramisu in DC. And on the right, I have a insalata caprese from Vincenzo Alaya at Cafe Alaya in New York. In the 1990s, we started seeing a lot of authentic Italian foods come into play here in the United States. Different types of cheeses, the panzanella salad, focaccia, truffles, pancetta, balsamic vinegar, the concept of baristas, and also the concept of regional Italian foods. So it helped back us up with that first category of authentic Italian foods here in the United States. My second category is the fake Italian food in the United States. And the reason I put it up top at number second, not the bottom where it deserves to be, is because unfortunately, this is what most people see. When you go to the supermarket, when you go to stores, when you go to chains, when you go to fast food restaurants, these are the things that non-Italians are bombarded with. And if they don't know what it is, it gets them the first impression. And it makes, of course, a horrible impression. So you see something called pizza, and it looks like that picture up there in the middle. Or you see something in the top left with those 3 lumps of overcooked noodles at a chain restaurant that uses, you know, the word garden in its title. And it's just so wrong on so many levels. Overcooked, mass-made, wrong sauces put together, just like it looks like slop on a plate. Over on the right, we have lasagna. This is like one of those freezer lasagnas that you can get in the frozen section. They're made with, you know, some kind of curly noodles and things just thrown together. It has nothing to do with the highlight masterpiece that is true Italian lasagna. From whatever region you're from, you've got a lasagna. Maybe there's several lasagnas in your region, and they're all going to be better than that. The one on the bottom left, again, chain restaurant, putting things out in an inappropriate way, garlic, salt, and sauces that are, you know, horrible. Then in the middle, you have bottled dressing, which, you know, there is no bottled dressing. It's olive oil and vinegar, olive oil and lemon juice, like that's it. This one has chemicals in it. It has sodium in it. It has sugar in it. A lot of things that are detrimental to our health. And then they use the word Italian on it. Same thing with the breadcrumbs, Italian breadcrumbs. You know, in Italy, the breadcrumbs are plain, like no dry herbs. Also with the fake Italian food, you find the number one thing is the tomato sauce. So this is the label in the back of a jar of jarred sauce. These are the ingredients. And I put them there because anybody who knows how to make sauce, if you just want to sugo di pomodoro, you know all you need is garlic, olive oil, a little pepperoncino if you want to get fancy, or your calabrese, the tomatoes, some salt and pepper, and basil, maybe oregano or parsley if you want to get fancy. That's it. Like those ingredients, that's it. Healthy, good for you, easy, anti-inflammatory, full of antioxidants. But if you buy a jar, you've got tomato puree, which is water and tomato paste, diced tomatoes and tomato juice, sugar, it's a big one, beef, Canola oil contains salt, beef fat, spice, dehydrated onions, dehydrated garlic, like yeast extract. So you're like asking for health problems by using that jar. But what happened is there are a lot of Italian Americans that use these jars. And I don't mean to shame anybody. It's a problem that happened in this culture, because after industrialization in World War II, a lot of the women had to go to work. Women who were by then at home taking care of their kids went to work, and out comes industrialization with all of these ads saying, smart women use this food, because they had to sell the products, right, that were being made in the factories. Smart women use this food. Smart women don't waste their time cooking. Smart women use modern, clean products. There was all kinds of propaganda to get housewives in the United States to use this type of food. So no, again, nothing wrong if anyone, learned how to do that. But what it did was it robbed a generation, maybe 2 generations of people from really knowing how to cook homemade food. And we can see now 1 out of every 2 American adults, 1 out of every 2 American adults has either diabetes or pre-diabetes. That's half. It's a huge number. And these things are the reason for it. These types of breads with their name, Italian on it, and they just are con. Then we have spumoni. So spumoni gets a lot of bad names, but and there are a lot of horrible ones. But I want to defend it a little bit because it is an Italian American food when it was made properly, and it was started by a Neapolitan. It was sold. Ludovico Barbati made it, and he called it spumoni, which meant like a big foam, because his version was a cross between ice cream and flavored ice. Like whatever the reason he could make it with his machinery, he didn't feel comfortable calling it gelato or ice cream. He didn't comfortable calling it granita, so he called it spumoni. And at that time, chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry became the most popular flavors in the US. So the Neapolitans who wanted to sell their ice cream in their carts started calling, they were from Naples. So people started calling it Neapolitan ice cream. And that's why there's those, spumoni has its own flavors, and then the Neapolitan has its own flavors that don't exist in Italy. So this is our perfect lead-in for Italian American food. This is my 3rd category. This is what is genuine, authentic Italian American food that most of us grew up with, know about, feel comfortable with, and associate with. And when these ingredients, when these dishes are made well, they truly are masterpieces and deserve their own genre. It's just important that we call them Italian American and not Italian. So pollo alla parmigiana, of course, the parmigiani in Italy are always with eggplant, or you could do zucchini or another vegetable, but you're not going to do chicken or veal. That's the Italian American adaptation. Cioppino, which was from the, I think I have a slide later, so I'll save that one. Italian beef sandwiches in Chicago, the New York style pizza, the Detroit style pizza, the Chicago style pizza, the muffalettas from New Orleans, the fettuccine we already talked about, and the manicotti, which were originally cannelloni. And then in the United States, with the prepared pasta, they started doing the large sleeves and stuffing them in the same style as cannelloni were done in Italy. So this slide is all about chicken, because there's so many more chicken dishes that we have here in the United States, in Italy, and we do chicken in Italian ways, because chicken is a popular cell in the United States. It's our most popular protein right now, and it's been that way for a long time. We know there is a high premium placed in America on animal protein. So if you were an Italian restaurateur, people aren't going to buy the eggplant parmesan from you. They don't like eggplant. There was no appetite for it. There was an appetite for chicken though, so they could call it pollo alla parmigiana. I just met a Calabrese chef restaurateur from Uruguay a couple weeks ago, and he was telling me about the restaurant that he had, and when he was like, this is my chicken brava. And I said, what does brava mean? He said, oh, I just made it up, and it's this and this and this. But that's like very common of what restaurateurs did. So whether it was the cacciatore style chicken, the piccata down on the bottom right, or a roasted chicken, a lot more chicken was used in Italian recipes than was used in Italy. I even have some Neapolitan friends here now that are from Naples that make the ragu with chicken, because that's the only thing that their grandchildren in the United States will eat, even though you would never make it with chicken in Italy. And here's the original melanzane alla parmigiana. So up at the top left is the original one. And then on the bottom is from Pizzeria La Notizia, which some of you might know is Enzo Coccia's restaurant. The Maestro Pizzaiolo Enzo Coccia is who I got my pizzaiolo certification from, but he was on Stanley Tucci's Searching for Italy. And that's his sandwich called bustarella. This is a typical Neapolitan style sandwich, but it's made in a different way. You make it with a homemade dough, sometimes with homemade hand ground grains, whole grains. You make the bread, you bake it, then you slice it in half and put the eggplant parmesan in, and then you rebake it again. This gave birth to, in America, with now people who came to this country, maybe didn't know how to bake, definitely didn't have the nice forno a legno that Enzo Coccia has, and probably didn't have a lot of extra time on their hands. They started making the eggplant, the subs, right? The eggplant parm subs. So that's how we got into that tradition here in the States. Shrimp scampi. Of course, scampi is a certain kind of shrimp, larger type of variety. Gamberi is the Italian word for shrimp. So to have a dish called shrimp and then talk about a different variety after is a little bit of a weird name. Something doesn't exist in Italy, but of course, this is my recipe from my Italian diabetes cookbook on the left. You would have something very similar, it just wouldn't be called that. This one shows marinara sauce. So in the United States, this is from Wikipedia. It talks about marinara sauce is a tomato sauce usually made with tomatoes, garlic, herbs, and onions. It can include an addition of capers, olives, spices, and a dash of wine as possible ingredients and variations. This sauce is widely used in Italian-American cuisine, which is diverged from its old world origins. So marinara in Italy talks with something comes from the mare, something comes from the sea. So a marinaro is someone who is at sea, like someone who works at sea, fisherman, something like that. This pizza on the left is a traditional, authentic Italian, Neapolitan marinara style pizza, which is still served in Italy today. No cheese. The fact that it has no cheese is why it's called marinara, because Italians don't put fish with cheese together. So that sauce only served on pizza and is called marinara. Then if you want to have like a veal or a steak and you want to make it in the manner of the pizzaiolo, alla pizzaiolo, you serve it with that marinara sauce. That's it. You don't get pasta with marinara sauce in Italy. It doesn't have all these different ingredients like they're talking about in Wikipedia, but that evolved because that's kind of what people associated with it. And so people grabbed onto that term and it became a thing. And now in the United States, this marinara sauce is its own entity where it never really was in, or is in Italy today. Then we have caciucco and cioppino. So caciucco, this is also a recipe from my book. This is Livornese, from the Italian Ligurian town of Livorno. And in that town, a lot of people from there emigrated to the United States, to San Francisco. And they were working as fishermen and on the docks. And they then in San Francisco, with the local fish and the local ingredients, developed what we now call cioppino. So cioppino is I like to say, the grandson of the caciucco Livornese. And then we have the sfincione. In Sicily, there's this type of focaccia / pizza that means a large sponge. The sfinge, it comes from the Arabic word sfinge, which means sponge. And when Sicilian Americans came to the United States, they started making them in different ways, and of course making them a little bit more to the local palate, maybe a little bit more sugar in the sauce and things like that. But Philadelphia, Utica, a lot of different places have their tomato pies, and this is a direct descendant of the sfincione. Then we have lasagna, of course. This picture on the left is the classic bolognese. Every region in Italy has its version. In Calabria, there's one where they slice hard-boiled eggs in the middle, and they also have little meatballs. They don't have the meat ragu like in Bolognese, but they have meatballs that are either teeny tiny or they're larger, and they slice and put in between. And then, of course, you have the American version, which has the layers of the thick ricotta cheese and ground meat or some other version, but a direct descendant, even though very different. Important to note, a lot of these dishes were eaten at holidays in Italy, became just associated with Italian Americans and could be eaten anytime. So like, the average person in Italy will eat lasagna maybe once a year, twice a year on a holiday, maybe like on New Year's. But in America, of course, you can get it any time, and it's something that they sell, in the freezer section. So it's a little different also how and when things are served compared to Italy. And then of course, you're the Pizza University. So I'm proud to be a brand ambassador for the Pizza University here in Maryland. And what we do is we educate and certify people in different styles of pizza making. So you can make authentic Roman style pizza, Neapolitan style pizza, New York style. Their blog is also a great resource because it tells the difference of each style of pizza and what goes into making them. So you can actually look it up and know what the requirements are. And then the fourth category is foods that Italians invented in the US. So I'd like to include this in my talk about Italian-American cuisine, even though many people wouldn't think of it, because to me, if it's invented by an Italian in America, it's Italian-American. And even, you know, they're not part of my particular repertoire, but it's important for our culinary history to note these things. So the one on the left in Buffalo, New York, the Anchor Bar, where Teresa Bellissimo started making buffalo wings. She made it one night with what she had left over. The wings were something she used to make stock with. And the legend is that her son and his friends came in hungry one night after closing, and all she had was some hot sauce and, you know, the chicken wings, and she developed this recipe, which is now iconic all over the world today. Same thing with the Philly cheesesteaks. This was also invented by an Italian couple. Fettuccine Alfredo, we talked a little bit about earlier, but this actually has the handle and the name of the restaurant. So it's Alfredo alla Scrofa, and you can follow that handle. And down at the bottom is my friend Chef Marco Muglioni's handle. You can follow him, and you can see exactly what they're doing at this restaurant today. Just remember, don't ask the average Italian if they make this dish, because it's not served or made anywhere else. And then we have penne alla vodka. So this is also an Italian-American dish, not done in Italy, unless they're doing it on purpose because they want to make something Italian-American. Luigi Francese was the name of the gentleman who was credited with inventing it. But it's basically a spiff on the Aurora sauce. So if you look at the Italian sauces and how they're categorized, you have a tomato sauce that you add cream to, and this is called Aurora. It looks like the word Aurora in Italian. He added vodka to an Aurora sauce, basically, to make it alla vodka. And it took off, and it's very popular, probably one of our most iconic Italian-American dishes. Then we have chicken cacciatore, which is unique because this is a dish that's popular in both places in different ways. The one on the left is how it's served in the United States. The one on the right is a picture from Italy. So very, very similar, of course, hunter style. So a lot of times in Italy, it will have like mushrooms or things like that in it. And then we have Chicago, the Italian beef. This was something invented by the men working on the docks, where they, had the beef, they braised it slowly, and then they put a giardiniera or type of pickles on top in order to make it feed the local sensibility. So again, you're thinking you're a worker, you're manual labor, you need something really filling. Meat is less expensive in the United States, and this becomes a typical street food. And then this next fifth category, I like to call the Italian culinary time capsules. These are really important to me. These are probably my favorites, because these are the ones that link us to our ancestors, to our future, and to our, if we still are fortunate enough to have them, relatives in Italy. So the top right with the sprinkles, some of you might call them cucinati, I call them petrali, depending upon where you're from, but they're the fig filled cookies that we often make at Christmas time. And these are something that were passed down to me from my grandmother. And they are a recipe that my relatives in Italy still make. So I like that it's my great-grandmother's recipe. I like that people are still making it now. Same thing with the Cuzzupa di Pasqua. That one is millennia old, that recipe for the Easter bread. And then we have strufoli, of course, from Naples, and the pastiera, passato di pomodoro. These are things that people make on both sides of the pond, very similar ingredients, very similar methods, without even knowing it. And so we have that synergy going. And so these time capsules are beautiful. Sometimes, these are made more in the United States than in Italy. Like my cousins that are my age in Italy don't make Cuzzupa di Pasqua, and they don't make the cucinati or the petrali. Of course, they don't have to because they live in Italy, but also they didn't need to because they had places that made them, but also they weren't looking for this identity, and they weren't needing this common connection that I was from growing up in the United States. Then my last category is American foods that have Italian ingredients or Italian style. This is becoming bigger and bigger with food TV, cooking shows, restaurants. So the top one is from my friend Matteo Venini at Stellina restaurant. He did this brasato di manzo sandwich with crocchette di patate. So basically he takes pizza dough and makes the bun, and then he has this braised beef that could be like a burger or a roast beef sandwich, right? And then instead of using French fries or potatoes, he does Italian crocchette di patate. So it's 3 different Italian things, not eaten the way it's eaten in Italy at all, but put together in a way that would appeal to American sensibilities. This one will continue to grow, this trend. Same thing with things like cheesecake that are made with ricotta, or French toast that is made with panettone. You'll see this a lot. A lot of TV chefs do it, and a lot of restaurants are doing it. And so if anybody's interested, I have my own line of private label products. You can get a discount from them at d'Italia.com. Just use my name, Amy Riolo 10, and you can get like a 10% discount. So I have my own olive oil, my own white balsamic, and a DOP pesto, and then an Italian Primi Essentials gift box that has like everything you need to make authentic Italian first courses. This is my latest book, the Mediterranean Diabetes Cookbook. And again, that's all of my contact information if you have any questions or need any information after this ends tonight. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention and for your time. I know I realized I went a little bit over, but I'm very grateful to have the time because I wanted to be able to explain a lot of things.
Thank you so much, Amy. Behind the scenes, we had Gabriella answering a lot of questions that came through that you actually answered throughout your presentation. But I do have one question, but before I say that, we should have had a warning. I'm starving. I'm absolutely starving watching this. And you've inspired me to think about what was in my fridge. I'm going to make an Italian-American dish, and that would be shrimp scampi. So I did really appreciate those different categories and learning that again. Thank you so much for doing that. But the question that I have that was not answered was, do you think the Italian government should try to crack down on fake Italian foods in the United States? What can be done?
Well, that's a great question. So, you know, with the NIAF, a couple of years ago, I actually wrote an article together with Luigi Diataiuti from El Tiramisu, and it was all about stopping the imposter fake food and you know, what that entailed and what we would need to do. So it's always important to remember the number one important thing is consumer dollars talk. So just be careful what you as a person buy. It's like the way that we spend, that's our vote. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of the Italian government and what they're doing, instead of tackling what's going on in other countries, they're really putting more funds towards education, number one, and number two, into labeling. So they have what are called GIs, and these GIs mean geographic indicators, DOP, IGP, IGT, in the wine, DOC, DOCG. Those geographic indicators mean that the Italian government has controlled and will endorse those products as being authentic and what they are. So if you're buying an authentic product, Italian product, you can look for that. There is a little caveat though, with my products, because they're very small estate, they're not mass-produced products, I don't get that certification for them, but they don't need it because you can literally go to the place where they make them and see. It's not like a big mass production. So some places don't even bother doing that because they already qualified by default. But otherwise, if you're looking at like a big brand, a big thing, definitely look at those and it's not about just Italy. You know, it's the same thing. If you're buying something that's French, if you're buying something that's Spanish, if you're buying an American thing, like Idaho potatoes, that's an example of a GI in the United States, wild Maine blueberries. You know, I was at an event at the State Department, and John Kerry was speaking. This was probably 5 years ago, and he said that when at the time he was the Secretary of State, and he was talking about how they did an event in Korea where a chef used wild Maine blueberries, and he labeled it as wild Maine blueberries, and because of that, they could track the next year. I don't want to misquote it. It was a big percentage, like 30%. Raise in sales in wild Maine blueberries in that country that year because that one chef used those. So by giving things the GI, by talking about them, by explaining what they are, that's how we can do it. But it's going to continue to be a problem because Italian food is number one. So that's good. We have that to be thankful for. But then we just really have to make sure that we're understanding what those labels mean, that we're looking at it, The NIAF's got resources on it. The Italian Embassy has resources on it. My website has resources on it. So there's a lot of different places that you can go and get the information. Just make sure, you know, as much as possible, you're buying the good stuff. And every day there's like a different loophole. You know, as in college, I learned that when they make bulletproof vests, like every time they make a bulletproof vest, they make a new bullet that can get through the vest. That's like the same thing with these foods. Every time they come up with something that explains this is what authentic, then a manufacturer will find like a loophole to use that term and then so we have to like go back and get it again. But look at the ingredients, you know, see what's in there.
Thank you. Thank you. That was incredible information. Thank you so much. We did get another question from Christina. She said, interesting presentation. I'm an Italian-American registered dietitian that works in a food service setting. I'm curious, from a culinary trend perspective, how do you see other Mediterranean style of food, Greek, influencing each other and expanding the current understanding of Mediterranean diet?
That's a great question. You know, one of my things, even though I'm Italian, in the Mediterranean lifestyle, Mediterranean diet space is to give voice to all the different cultures within the Mediterranean, because as you can see by the maps I showed earlier, we have a similar commonality. The lifestyle, the diet has a commonality that I like to share, but not everybody is doing that. In the food service space, my hope is that one of the things that I see is that public tastes are changing. You know, people think about 10 years ago, nobody knew what hummus was or wanted it. Now it's like an acceptable thing. It's just a snack. It's something that's part of our repertoire. And I hope that healthful foods, you know, whatever culture that they're from, make their way in. And I hope that they make their way in a good, healthful way that people can have access to them. And also produce, just plain old produce. Like, we need more of that. We need more of the fresh ingredients in the large scale institutions and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came through our chat was, so these ingredients are naturally organic as well. Do they need the organic label?
I'm not sure quite which.
I'm reading it. So Christina, if you want to expand on that just a little bit for Amy, I can read that again for her.
Again, before I get the specific answers, I will say that there are some things in Italy that are made. First of all, it's important for everyone to understand the food laws in Italy are so strict and so stringent. They take the food laws more serious than Americans take tax laws. Like, that's how serious it is. So even though it might seem like, oh, they might be lax or not care, no, when it comes to food, like, it is big time and they really care. So and especially the people, you know, what is considered extra virgin olive oil has to have an acidity rate of 0.8% or lower. Most self-respecting Italians will not serve to their family anything less than a 0.2%, maybe 0.4 on like a really bad day. So they're automatically, they have it in them to want to serve, give themselves, and produce the best quality. So if you're working with like a small producer, a single estate, something like that, their standards might be better than organic, and they might just naturally be following them, so they don't feel the need to spend the extra money to get an organic stamp when they don't sell that much product anyway, and they know themselves how good it is. It's like same thing with chocolate, you know, in Latin America, bean to bar. If some of those bean to bars don't have the fair trade stamp, but because they're bean to bar, they automatically go through that.
Okay. She said that you answered part of her question. She said, I guess I meant, are your products naturally organic? Are the ingredients in your product organic? In your products?
Some of them are, and other ones, they like I said, they kind of already exceed those standards, so they don't bother looking with them. I deal with, in Abruzzo, I work with Tommaso Masciantonio to make my olive oil. It's Trappetto di Caprafico, and they win. If you go on their website, they were rated the 3rd best olive mill in the world. They constantly win the gold award in Vinitaly in Italy and in New York. For the vinegar, I go with the Castelli company, like Castelli. That's a very traditional vinegar maker in Italy. You can look them up. And then with the pesto, I use Alessandro Anfosso from Liguria, again, award-winning olive oil, ANFOSSO, and it's got DOP products into pesto.
Well, thank you, Amy. That hits all the questions, but I have one more comment before we go this evening. I was recently told that 90% of pizzeria in Rome use mozzarella from Germany and canola oil instead of Evo. Do you think that's accurate?
I've never seen canola oil used in Italy.
Okay.
I don't see it in supermarkets. I don't see it because there are other oils that are used to save money. But usually in Italy, when Italians are trying to save money in a mass like a mass thing like that, it will be a cheaper olive oil, because you have to remember olive oil is already cheaper in Italy anyway than it is here. So it's not as expensive as it is here. So if people want to cut corners, there are many different grades of olive oil and there are cheaper ones. The mozzarella from Germany, 90% is an exaggeration. It exists, but not to that extent.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Amy. We've went well over our hour, but beautiful presentation and interesting information. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Yes,
thank you all for tuning in. I'm sorry again for going over.
Oh, no, we learned so much. Thank you. But on behalf of the National Italian-American Foundation, thank you. And to all of our guests who joined us. And just as a reminder, this is recorded. You will get this recording in your inbox in just several days. And remember, if you don't get it in several days, it probably went to your junk box. So please take a look there or contact NIAF at any time. And again, more virtual events just like this is on our website. And we do hope to see Amy again with some more of her presentation. So thank you, and thank you, Amy, and grazie, and buonasera.
Grazie a te, Andrea. Grazie a Gabriella.